and this is political education time. To you and me, it's just reminding ourselves of things we already know, and if there's anybody young here, they might learn something. But today we're on fascism. So, what is fascism? Well, we all probably know, and as you probably know, that my partner in crime, Mr. Milligan, has been writing about fascism as well. But fascism, oh, and by the way, as we get into this, keep your head turning. And as we go through it, think of how many of these things we've seen in recent years from the UK state. Okay. Right, fascism is a far-right authoritarian political ideology emphasising extreme nationalism, militarism, and dictatorial power, subordinating individual rights to the state for national unity and strength, often involving suppression of opposition and glorification of the nation through violence and control. Now, before we move on, modern fascism, because fascism has been around well beyond what I'm going to call modern fascism. And I said I wasn't going to touch on communism because it's not really touched these islands in any great way. But you say, but David, neither is fascism. And I'm about to remind you that it has. It had a different name under supreme monarchy or absolute monarchy. It was called tyrannical. But it's the same thing. And in England, particularly, there have been a lot of tyrannical monarchs. So, who have we had? We'll go for the earliest one recorded, and that would be Edward II, 1307 to 1327, seen as an incompetent ruler who favoured corrupt favourites, leading to England's near ruin and his eventual deposition, eventually being deposed. Mary I, 1553 to 1558, didn't last long, known as Bloody Mary, for her persecuting Protestants, burning hundreds at the stake during her short reign. And of course, there was King John, infamous for losing French territories, heavy taxation, and cruelty, leading barons to force him to sign the Magna Carta. Richard III, a controversial figure known as a tyrant, often blamed for murdering his nephews, the princes in the Tower. Right, Charles I believed in divine right of kings. He clashed with Parliament, dissolving it, and his tyrannical rule ultimately led to the English Civil War and his execution. And of course, Henry VIII, he was famous for executing people, thousands of them. It's estimated that he managed to execute between 50 and 72,000 people. But as I say, fascism's been around a long time. Modern fascism is what we're talking about here. Okay. And a lot of it's just the same. So, as I say, it's a far-right ideology, a authoritarian political ideology emphasising extreme nationalism, militarism, dictatorial power, subordinating individual rights to the dictator's idea of the state's rights. And it's operated through violence and control. Core characteristics: extreme nationalism and ultra-nationalism. That's why they're calling us nationalists in Scotland on the right, even though we've redefined nationalism and have created a left-wing civic nationalist movement. All right, now we've got authoritarianism and totalitarianism. And that's centralised autocratic rule by a single dictator and a single party with extensive control over public and private lives. Militarism, glorification of military power, war and strength, fueling conflict as a way to prove national vitality. Wow, slaughtering the young is a good way to prove national vitality. That's a great way of killing national vitality, you silly buggers. Suppression of dissidents. Well, that one's quite prevalent today. David and I are a case point. Forcible crushing of political opponents using violence and propaganda. And of course, cult of personality. Loyalty to a magnetic charismatic leader, and anti-democratic and anti-liberal. That's the other thing about fascism. They reject individual rights, equality, pluralism, and democratic processes, viewing them as weak. And of course, economic control is ultimately important to a fascist, because if that fascist controls your economic prosperity, then you're more likely to bend to his will if he stroke she was going to reward you for it and make your life easier for it. Now, the two key figures in what we call modern fascism was Benito Mussolini in Italy in 1919, and of course latter 1930s Germany with Adolf Hitler. Now, they became infamous throughout World War II, but what brought them to power was actually disillusionment with the young democracies that were around. At the time, when we talk about young democracies, well, you know, empires and absolute monarchy was the norm across Europe right up until the 17th, 18th centuries. So when we talk about young democracies, then we're only talking about 200 or 300 years. All right. Now, when we look at it and we think, how many of these things do we see happening here? Well, on the right in England, we've got ultra-nationalism promoting intense, often exclusionary national beliefs, their nation or race to be superior. That's the Tommy Robertson mob down that road. Authoritarian leadership and totalitarianism. Power is centralised under a single dictator. Well, we're seeing the way that previous prime ministers and Starmer's doing at the moment is concentrating power in the cabinet office. And when we talked about bad legislation, one of the reasons why the previous Tory administration under Theresa May introduced the Henry VIII laws, or the secondary legislation thing, was so that they could concentrate power, almost becoming a dictatorship, by committee at least.
This is the political part. Yes. We do also speak politics to you today. All I can say is Albert Arnold fucking back with it. This time, let's show it!
Good morning to all you fine people of the UK. This is your favorite and the most loved and of course the best president in the history presidents ever. Donald J.T. Wump here with a special message for everyone that is watching. Mr. McGuinness, Guinness, they love me in Ireland too. You had better have liked, shared and subscribed or I will send E. Long over with his chainsaw. E. Long, he's a very fine person, but a bit how is it? You Brits say it. Thick, but he had fun dogging. Anyway, you bunch of bigly losers, don't be panic-kins, and just do what I, your most beloved, Mango Moose Knuckle say. That's a lovely term of endearment from the 51st state, Canada, along with the greeting of Yar Big Orange Hoser. Just like, share, and subscribe. P.S. That sausage fingers keeps sending me love letters, Please ask him to stop, and unlike Ivanka, his wife camel toe, I would not slip her my tiny orange mushroom as she is uglier than Ted Cruz's wife.
I said, as I say, authoritarian leadership and totalitarianism, power being centralised. Militarism and violence. Violence is accepted and glorified as a legitimate means for national rejuvenation and expansion of national power. Paramilitary groups like the Italian black shirts and the German brown shirts were used to intimidate and suppress political opponents. Suppression of opposition. Well, let's go to militarism and violence. We'll go back there. We'll get the suppression of opposition in a second. No, militarism and violence. Well, we talk about the Terrorism Act and all these people being done for showing support with a peaceful protest movement, or although a direct action peaceful movement. And then we look at things like the Police Crimes Courts and Sentencing Act down that road. All clamping down on the right to protest. That's clamping down on opposition as well. But the show of strength for the police and things like that, these things, in order to shut them down, that's pretty much militaristic. It really is. So, militaristic and violent. The way people are being lifted off the street for holding bits of paper, well, if they're non-compliant, it can be violent. But it can be violent just a peaceful being arrested peacefully. It's a violation of your rights to freedom of movement, freedom of expression, freedom to protest, freedom to gather. So that is a point, it is a form of violence. Then, of course, suppression of opposition. We see that happening with anybody who opposes the UK state's continued complicity in the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And of course, one of the key characteristics of fascism is to scapegoat and to demonise a minority or a group of minorities. And we're seeing that happening here when it comes to refugees and those who are coming here through legal migration. So there are some tenets of fascism which are actually kicking around the UK state at the moment. But the ones that really concern us and should concern us here at this point in time is, of course, the cult of leadership, which Farage is counting on, and Trump has managed to pull off with his MAGA mob. And, of course, the suppression of individual liberties. These are the factors that are at play here at the moment. These are the big ones that are at play here at the moment, which shows that we're on the slippery slope to fascism. And then, of course, there's the consolidating of power in the Cabinet Office by the use of secondary legislation, bypassing both the houses of Parliament down that road. So it is creeping in. It is creeping in. So fascism, what is it? Well, it's a political idealism which is based on a ultranationalism, authoritarianism, militarism, suppression of opposition, scapegoating and demonisation of minorities, and anti-liberal, anti-communism and anti-democratic rights and views, because they're seen as a weakness. And one of the other main tenets of fascism is strict social hierarchy, which of course is dictated by the leader. So I hope that reminds us all what fascism is. Right-wing ultranationalism, authoritarianism, militarism, we're seeing that playing out and all with the talk of ramping up the military. Suppression of opposition, we're actually seeing that in play here. Scapegoating and demonisation of minorities, we're seeing that happening here. Anti-liberalisation and anti-communism, well, that's no really playing out here. Liberalism is actually flowing. It's a flowing movement. Went from classic to modern, now neo. They say I wasn't going to talk about neoliberalism, but as I was looking more and more into it, because I've already explained what it is, it's a dereliction of duty by the state, but it more or less hands over the running of the state to corporations. But the reason why I'm going to cover it, and I said I wasn't going to cover it, is I want to highlight key areas in the UK where the UK government has handed over responsibility for huge amounts of the state's responsibility to private enterprise. All right. And of course, the other thing about fascism is it's a bit like the old class system, strict social hierarchy. So keep all these things in mind, folks, as you observe our politics going forward. All right. So, but when I look at some of the younger vloggers and bloggers and they talk about being off the left and things like that, and then you realise that they don't really understand what the left is or was, because they've never actually lived through a socialist regime. Whereas Maesties, who are 50 and above, myself, I lived through the tail end of the socialist experiment, 60, 70, 79. So it's always good to put these things out there and remind ourselves of what's going on. All right. That ends today's session on political ideologies.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Charlie says that Mr. McGuinness is totally rantastic, so click that like button.